Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a podcast by Practical E-Commerce.
What's going on, Internet? Eric Banholtz here, founder of Beard Brand, and you are listening to another E-Commerce Conversations on how to build an e-commerce business. I have a special guest, as always, on the other end of the world. It is Andrew Udarian. He's actually not here in the Austin studio. I just missed him. He was in town not too long ago, but he's back in his hometown of, what is it, Flagstaff, Arizona?
Tucson right now.
Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah.
And why don't you go ahead and give a little rundown of maybe the projects you worked on in the past, as well as what your current project is?
Sure. Well, hey, thanks for having me on. This is fun, Eric. I always love talking with you. So my story in a nutshell is got out of school, went into the finance world for a couple of years, got burned out, and wanted to start my own thing. So I started an e-commerce business selling, of all things, CB radio equipment. That was about in 2008. Ran that for a couple of years. Started another e-commerce business selling trolling motors, like these kind of electric motors for fishing. And along the way, just learned a few things about e-commerce, started meeting some people, and launched a site called Ecommerce Fuel, which is it's evolved into a community for seven-figure e-commerce sellers and people that have been doing it, and just in the trenches sellers. I've since sold the other two businesses and now focus all my time on the community, running the community, and the way I try to add value, or our team tries to add value, is through an online forum where we make sure everyone in the community is helping out and willing to add value through our live events and through some software that we create to help people make better decisions about what tools to use for their business. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Sweet. So we will be talking about how to build a community on this episode. And it's especially pleasing for me because typically I'm on the other end of the spectrum. Andrew, also Ecommerce Fuel is a podcast, one of the greatest podcasts out there for e-commerce. So if you don't already listen to his podcast, I highly recommend you do it. He brings on excellent guests. And of course, he has a voice that you could listen to for hours.
Thanks, man. You're too kind. You should see I need like 4 or 5 machines here to get it from the squeaky voice to a somewhat reasonable for radio voice. So without that, I'd be doomed.
Yeah, I'm sure. So talk about, obviously the podcast started before the community, right?
It started pretty much about the same time. Started blogging at Ecommerce Fuel about 2012 and started both the community and the podcast right in the summer of 2013. So pretty concurrently.
Okay. What was the idea behind actually starting up a community? Like why the heck would you want to do that?
It's funny. When I started writing, I had no idea what I wanted to do at Ecommerce Fuel. I just knew that I liked e-commerce. I felt like I could maybe add a little bit of value in the space, given my experience. And like all entrepreneurs, thought maybe there'd be a way to create a viable business out of it. And I didn't know what that looked like. And so I sold some courses for a while, but there's a lot of people selling courses, and I didn't really like keeping up with the course, and saw that what I really enjoyed was connecting with other people doing similar things. And there wasn't a community for people who really were established at some level. And so I thought I'd try it out, and it spent 3 or 4 months really putting some time and energy into it, and it seemed like it had some legs and people got value out of it, so kind of stuck with it. So for me, it just was a cross between, there was potentially an opening in the market, and it was something I enjoyed doing. So
now we're trying to build a community here at Beard Brand, and it's really challenging. I feel like one of the lessons we learned is like people seem to join for kind of the value that you provide, and then they stay because of the community members.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
How are you getting people convinced to come and join the community?
So when you look at where people hear about us or why they join, we don't do any paid traffic. We're not advertising, and marketing really at this point is isn't something we're pushing real hard. I would say probably 80% of people either come through listening to the podcast. They've listened for a while and they feel like, maybe it's something they want to check out and take a next step, or from personal referrals from people who are part of the community and can vouch for it, and they tell other people. So that, I think that's how we get, people to at least give us a shot to come in and give us a shot to sign up. So I'd say those are the two big ways. We're not doing a whole lot of other marketing. Those are kind of our primary inbound channels for it.
I think what was really interesting of what you just said was the next step. And to me, that's like, no, you don't just come join the community. It's more of, here's the evolution you need to do to get immersed, to become a better version of yourself as an entrepreneur. And I don't know if that was intentional, how you did that, or if that's just kind of how you communicate the value of the community.
Yeah, well, I think almost any relationship, whether it's you're going to buy something or it's friendship, there's always a progression, right? And I think it's really easy for business owners to forget about that, to forget that it's as a consumer or someone who's thinking about that, it's obvious, but we totally forget those things when we put on our entrepreneurial hat. And I think one of the reasons podcasting is so great as an inbound lead channel is, and to convince people, or at least maybe tease people into thinking it's maybe worth at least trying something out, is you have the chance to build a rapport over time in a medium that is pretty unique. I mean, how many other places do you have the chance to talk into somebody's life, for 30 plus minutes at a time and build rapport and trust with them? So yeah, it's always a stair step, whatever you're doing, building a business or relationships.
Now, would you have built a community for your CB radio business, or would you see that there's value that could be built in an e-commerce business?
I don't want to say it's impossible. I think it is more challenging with a product-based business unless you have a product that's very conducive to people being extremely passionate about it, willing to come back on a regular basis and share a lot of tips and tricks and strategies and really geek out over it. So for CB radios, no. A lot of times people would come in, they'd need a CB radio for their vehicle, for their truck, for their off-road rig. They'd want to buy it and then they'd use it, but it was not something they were passionate about. There's a few exceptions there. There's definitely a CB market that, people, certain segments that potentially is the exception for, but I think for our market we were serving, no. So I probably wouldn't have, because it's tricky. You got to get people that are really sold out and willing to come back day after day after day to engage.
Let's segue into like managing the community, because, without people engaging on a daily basis, there's no value in the community at all, right? Mm-hmm. So what are you doing in those early days to first get those first members and to make sure that the conversations continue?
Yeah. So it's the early part is, stating the obvious here, but the hardest part, because you've got a chicken and an egg problem, right? Like, who's going to come into a community with nobody in there, but you got to start somewhere. And so the way I approached it was, I spent a year writing around e-commerce and trying to build up some connections and some content and some relationships before I even launched the community. And I think that's crucial. So it's really hard to start a community without from scratch or without any network. So I spent a year doing nothing but writing and reaching out to people and build up a seed list of about 150 people who I thought would be good additions to a community. And once I had that seed list, opened up a forum, and over the course of about 30 to 45 days, I dripped those 150 people in real gradually. 4 this day, 5 the next day, another 5. And I had them introduce themselves. I introduced them to other people. I was very involved with kickstarting discussions, asking people to weigh in on them. The activity and the introductions and the discussion was very much driven top down by myself. And I relied a lot on my rapport and connection with people in those early days to drive that, because if you've got, if you're starting from scratch, that's really why people are going to get involved, especially if there's friction. Like it takes a reasonable amount of time to go check out a discussion online with people you don't yet have a relationship with and spend 5, 10, 15 minutes writing a reply. And the only reason people are going to do that is because they're really sold on your vision or purpose, or they know you and have some level of rapport with you. So that was the level that was kind of the strategy early on. And then as that snowball kind of grew a little bit, I was able to back off a little bit, but it took it was probably 18 months, maybe even 2 years, probably 18 months before we were really able to back off to the point where a lot of the activity was self-sustaining.
So you're hands-on for the first 18 months. How many members is that? Or how many members did you guys have to get up to until it was kind of hands-off?
That's a good question. I would say probably ballpark, probably the 350 to 450 range, I would say right around there.
And staying on the management side of things, we've kind of talked about this offline a little bit, but talk about like the platforms you're looking on. I know the easy ones are going to be, Facebook or Reddit or a subreddit. What would you recommend to listeners out there for their platform and kind of why, or what to look out for?
Yeah, so platforms are always tricky. I will say I do think the personal aspect, especially early on, trumps technology. So if you've got a form that you're madly in love with or really well, or Facebook is, you're not technical at all and you really don't want to start your own, running your own form software, if you're willing to make up for a little bit of that on the rapport side, the connection side, and the effort side, you can, the social side of it definitely trumps technology. That being said, I really like having your own form software because you get to set it up how you want to. You can customize it for your niche. It gives you way more control. You control it completely with Facebook. I mean, if you look at the history of Facebook, and maybe the history of online marketing in general, it's kind of a story of just, a platform launches, it gets people to come in and invest in it, and then slowly kills their organic reach in order to monetize them. And I think that's going to be the case with Facebook groups eventually. So you own it and you can customize it. In terms of specific platforms, I'd recommend, we run right now on a community called Vanilla Forms, and they've been pretty good, but we're actually in the final stretch, probably about a week and a half away from migrating to community software called discourse.org. And it's fantastic, reasonable priced. And I won't get into all the reasons why I love it, but if I had to pick one piece of form software to use today, that would be it. So that's kind of what we're using for form software, and thoughts on that.
And in terms of like, as you set this up, is this something that you would recommend to be a private community where you can't see it from an SEO perspective or from a public perspective, or would you have an open community that anyone could join? And of course, like in the concept of an e-commerce business owner,
I think it depends. So in the concept of an e-commerce business owner, you think about, what are your goals? Well, your goals are maybe to create some goodwill for the brand, some marketing, probably some SEO traffic, so people will come either check out your store directly because they land on a topic that happened and then they find their way to your store, or maybe they just, they come get involved in the community and get to know people, and you're the host of the party and you receive some direct, indirect benefits that way too. So for an e-commerce store, I think in most cases, it would make a lot of sense to have it be public for that publicity and for the SEO traffic. Like our community is private because we talk about a lot of things that people don't necessarily want to be public for employees to see, or maybe competitors or things like that. But I think for an e-commerce store, it's usually going to make the most sense to have it be a public community.
Okay. And then in terms of paid membership or private membership, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that also kind of just depends on what you're trying to do and the niche you're in. If you have a paid model and you don't have some communities, that's the only way to make them work. So with our community, e-commerce fuel, there's really that is the product, and that's what we're investing in. And so if it wasn't a paid community, I'd have to do something else to try to make it viable and be able to invest time in it. And I don't think it would work out quite so well. So I think it does make sense for the more sensitive the topic, the more the value really comes from high level sensitive conversations or things people aren't willing to share, or to the extent that you can't. There's not a good business model otherwise for it. I think paid memberships make a lot of sense. And there's also the kind of that old adage, people value what they pay for. You're probably going to get more buy-in from people too if they pay for something. And it's a fine line. You don't want to you got to be careful because you got to also think about growing the community, and you don't want to bar people who otherwise would join. But I think you're going to see more engagement from people who pay for something versus people who it only takes 10 seconds to sign up and there's no cost.
Yeah, I think it's, we've just launched, I guess it's been about a year that we've had our private community. And, from an e-commerce perspective, the desire was to be able to add some stability to the business, as we're like many other businesses, and Christmas time is a really busy time for us. So being able to have a community a paid community was something that we thought may be able to kind of help level out the peaks, as people are coming in. But I think what we found is, kind of growing in those early days to that, that 350 mark was a lot more challenging than maybe we anticipated.
Yeah. And did you guys, your community was private, it wasn't public, right?
Yeah, it's still private.
What made you guys decide to do private versus kind of have it be open for that increased visibility and SEO traffic?
Yeah, from our perspective, there's a lot of online communities that provide like grooming advice and kind of like style advice online. And what we wanted to do is provide a kind of like a safer place that people could open up and share, like their style transformations, or be a little more vulnerable with what they're doing without, having to deal with the trolls and the well, generally just the assholes of the internet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we wanted to have like a little bit of barrier, and the paid part was part of that reason to have the barrier, and of course the private community was the other aspect.
Yeah, there's something really nice on the private side about, you got to be careful. You don't want to turn into a totally irrational dictator who is off, just goes off his rocker anytime something mildly out of line happens. But there's something really nice about having a private community where you have some level of vetting or some level of privacy in it, and if people misbehave, you just throw them out. Not that you talk to them first and give them a warning, but you have some pretty clear standards, and it's really nice to be able to curate an environment that you enjoy, and you enjoy the level of discourse and the tone of discourse. And I think that's easier to do in a private community than it is a public one.
Yeah, talk about your level of vetting. Like, what is it? What is your process like to get members in and ramped up to speed and making sure that they're healthy? And then, what's your policy for kicking them out?
Yeah, so it's kind of evolved over the years. We started out, and I think it was, you need to do $50K per year in revenue. And then as our community grew and as we grew, and we've bumped that up to 7 figures for most store owners, although we'll still definitely let people in if they're lower than that and they have a great brand or we think they'd be a great addition to the community. So in terms of vetting, people have to apply. They go through an application process. They share their experience. They share what their skills are, what they can give to the community, and then also, of course, their business. And we'll take a look at all of that and make sure we feel like, hey, this is someone we feel like is legitimately doing 7 figures or whatever they say they're doing. If we have any doubts, we'll ask for revenue proof of the screenshot, and then we've got a bit of a wait list now, and we're trying to prioritize that based on members we think that would be the best fit for the community long term. And so some of those things we look for are members who have their own independent proprietary brand, something that's unique, that's a little bit different, as opposed to maybe just reselling products. Members that have a level of experience. All things equal, it's nice to see someone that's grown. Although it's, like I said, revenue isn't the sole thing we look at, and also channel mix too. We're looking at what percentage of their revenues just come from just Amazon versus maybe Amazon and their own store and some other channels, because there's a different skill set that comes to with building out a multi-channel business. And so that's kind of how we vet people in. And then in terms of ongoing kind of moderation practices, we've got a couple of things that, like a couple of guidelines. I think if I was going to point to 2 that I would say that reciprocity is a huge value for us, and respect is a huge value for us. And I think everything boils down to those 2. So we want people coming in that this is not a sign up for this community and you can fire off your 200 questions to e-commerce experts. That's not what this is about. This is about being able to join a community of other people who are in this with you. And it's a just like any relationship, it's a place to give and receive. So if members start asking way more than they're giving back, we've got some internal triggers we look at. We monitor that, and if they abuse that, we cut off their ability to start new discussions. And so that's kind of one of the ways we try to regulate that. On the respect side, I kind of a 1 strike, 2 strikes and you're out kind of policy. I really don't. I have a real big problem with people who are rude or disrespectful, and I love great debates, a civil debate about 2 people that have different viewpoints, as long as they're respectful. It's one of my favorite things in the world. I was a debater in high school, and it was great. But there's it's different. There's a big difference between having a civil, respectful debate and being rude or talking down to people. And if that happens, people get 1 warning, and if they continue to do it, we just respectfully close their account because it's super toxic. That's not what I want in my community. And it's just, if you don't take care of those things and nip those things in the bud, you wake up one day and you realize you got a community that no one wants to hang out in.
Yeah, and in a lot of these software platforms, you get the ability to also, I guess, manage the DMs. Is that like a place that you're looking, or are you just looking in kind of like the quote unquote public areas?
Yeah, mostly the public areas. Definitely not going into the DMs and snooping unless we get, a report from somebody. Another one of our kind of policies is no pitching. So we're really careful. We rarely let vendors into the community. And the ones we have in there understand pretty clearly that if they pitch or start soliciting people, then they're going to get tossed out. So if we hear about that, if we hear of that being an issue or someone alerts us to that, again, one strike, 2 strikes and you're out kind of thing. But that tends to be less of an issue, thankfully.
Now, you guys have grown to the point. A couple things I wanted to talk about is you said you've got a wait list. Are you purposely keeping the community at a certain size, or is it just you kind of want to drip the new client or the new customers in, the new community members in?
Yeah, keeping it right around that 1,000 person mark, at least we have for the last year and a half or so. And the reasons are kind of twofold. One, community by definition is of a limited size, right? Like you don't have a community of, of the Northwest or even of a place like Seattle, like communities like this neighborhood or this group of people or, barbers in this area. And so the bigger you get, the harder it is, I think, to keep those ties really, strong. And the second part is thinking about competitors. We try to foster, really candid, transparent discussion. And the more people you have, the more chances there are that there are direct competitors in there. And I think there's a good case for, this isn't always the case. Some markets are genuinely a zero-sum game. And I think sometimes you can benefit as much from collaborating with competitors as you can from trying to stay walled off. But definitely, in a lot of cases, it does make people less willing to share. And so the more you grow, the more you have to do with that. So that we've kind of been keeping it smaller for those reasons. And I think it's really tricky because you look at the community life cycle, the absolute best members in the world. And even if you're, kind of managing a community and onboarding people in the best way possible, there's, everyone's got kind of life cycle or some kind of trend. People a lot of times will come in, your most active members will really take off and be very active for a while. But then, they'll still be part of the community and they'll still check in, but their activity kind of goes down over time. And that's just natural. And so it's really hard because you do need to balance that with bringing in new people, new perspectives, new expertise, while at the same time not growing too quickly. So it's kind of a tightrope you try to walk.
And for you, I guess it gets easy as you have your natural churn, right? A certain percentage of your community will, decide they're not having value in it, or they sold their business or whatever. They move on to different projects. That's when the spots open up. Is that what y'all are doing?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. You have those, people just for whatever reason end up leaving, and you open up some spots, and exactly. So that's kind of how we cycle in and out right now. And it's not a super hard and fixed one in, one out right now, though it's pretty close. But we've kind of, it's more of a gut feel. But we've got it's ended up being pretty close to almost exactly that over the last year or two. So.
What you guys have done with your online community, of course, is great, but I don't think the value and the power would be there without your events that you put on. Talk about like your decision to bring the online to the offline, or to the real world, as some people call it.
Yeah, meeting in real life, IRL. It's, like any relationship, you talk on the phone, you talk on chat, even video conference, and you get to know someone at a little bit better level, but that level of rapport, I feel like, goes up 10x when you meet in person. And so we do an annual event for the community called ECF Live. I bring everyone together once a year. And it's not a, when you look at it from a purely money-making standpoint, it's not the best use of time for the amount of time and energy we put into it relative to the little that, that what we make off of it. It wouldn't make sense as a standalone business, but it's super crucial for connecting members, for strengthening those bonds, for building trust, from taking just acquaintances and loose bonds and really strengthening those. And is what a community is about. I think you mentioned this, Eric, at some point. People come to a community for what they feel like they can get in terms of value, and they stick around because they've made connections and they like the people that are there. And that's just really important. So I think you don't have to have it for an online community, but I think if you're willing to invest in that, the level of depth and the level of stickiness and the duration that you'll see members stay around and be involved will really be improved if you can get people together in person.
Now, if someone's going to plan an online, or in-person conference or event, should there even be an expectation to make money on it? Is it possible to be profitable, or should you just kind of toss that idea out the window and just know that this is an investment in your top customers? And
it is possible to make money on it, but it takes time. I mean, I think the first event we ran, we lost $7,000 on it. So it didn't lose a crazy amount, but broke even. I think the next year we maybe made $5,000 or $6,000, something like that. And over the years, it's gotten to the point where if you look at it from a time perspective, it's probably still not a great use of time, but it is something that we can make a little bit of money in and use to reinvest in the community. So to answer your question, yes, absolutely, you can make money on it, but it takes years I think, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, and I know a lot of other community members that do this would echo what I'm saying. It takes a long time to get to the point where you can have it, kind of pay for itself. But I know very few people that run an event business on their own without some kind of back-end product or community or something to which that really ties in nicely. It's the events tend to usually be, in my experience, something that is attached to something else in the business, that really tends to be more of the business that makes more financial sense.
Okay, cool. What is your biggest mistake that you made in building your community? Something that you wish you could maybe do a little different, or a lesson that really you learned a lot from?
I would say, think about who your members are, what they really want, and then think about creating and curating a group of people in that forum that makes their discussions as easy and seamless as possible. And the mistake I'm thinking about is when we started, we let a lot of people in. So we let people from major e-commerce companies like Shopify in. We let service providers in who had consulting agencies. We let store owners in. We let employees in. If you had meaningful e-commerce experience in any of those different verticals, you could be a member. And that worked great, especially early on, looking for traction and trying to build some momentum. But one thing that we had to do probably 3 years ago at this point now was we made the decision to say, hey, if you're if you're an employee for a major e-commerce company like a shopping cart or email service provider, sorry, but we can't give you, we're not going to give you a full access account, because people would come in, they'd have these great conversations about shopping cart X, critiquing them, saying the benefits, and then all of a sudden an employee from shopping cart X would drop in and say, no, you're wrong. This isn't they get defensive and talk about stuff. And then the people who had posted would feel also defensive, because nobody likes, bad mouthing somebody when they're right there. And it's not bad mouthing people, but it's trying to have a candid discussion. And so we had to, some pretty hard discussions to go to people who'd been active and were some of our industry partners and say, hey, sorry, we're closing your forum account. So I would say, think really carefully about who you want. For us, I wish we had probably thought about that a little bit earlier on. So maybe a lesson for someone is think about what the motivations are behind the people that are going to be in the forum, and where those motivations may be at odds with each other, and think really carefully about what your who is in this community and who is outside of this community. Because that's another thing about communities that makes them stronger and maybe limits them a little bit, but also makes them more cohesive, is having very clear guidelines on who's a member and who's not. So I would have probably thought a little bit more about that before, we kind of had to have some tough discussions with people.
Yeah, I think that's very, very insightful and a great frame of reference, and great place to kind of wrap it up. What can people do to learn more about you or reach out to you? What are your social media, your websites, all that?
Yeah, best place is ecommercefuel.com. You can learn about the community there. You can also learn about just the podcast there as well. If you're a podcast listener, which hopefully, guessing you are, listen to this. I'm most active on Twitter, so at Youderian, Youderian is where you can catch me on social, and those are pretty much the key places to get a hold of me or see what I'm up to.
Cool. And I just want to call out, one of the favorite things that I love that you guys did as a member of your community is tagging members and bringing them into discussions, because it's kind of hard for me to go to a forum and read through everything and, know where the good nuggets are, but to have a community manager who is familiar with the different community members and the skills and expertise that they bring, and then bringing them back in the discussion, it makes it super easy to participate. So you've done a great job with that, and your team's done an excellent job with that. And that's probably a huge takeaway that I would recommend all of our listeners out there to try to do to foster that engagement.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being willing to weigh in. And I mean, Eric, you're our official branding expert in the community. You've been an awesome member since the beginning, or if not the beginning, very, very near it. And yeah, man, right back at you. Thanks for being such a stellar member and weighing in with stuff. Some of the posts you've shared in there that have been, open and candid about things have been just phenomenal. I mean, you won this year. You won Post of the Year at ECF Live for a thread that you put up, and yeah, man, it's been an honor having you in the community. So thanks for everything you've added.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. So, guys, this has been another e-commerce conversations. I hope you guys were able to take away some nuggets. As always, thanks for listening. Cheers, and keep on growing.